Okay, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday, and as per normal, I'll try and start with the news of the week, and then we can see if anybody has any comments on it. So the news this week, in summary, really is solar cell production is increasing dramatically, and California has some activities going on where they're trying to make electric time of use pricing a little more transparent. And actually another electric vehicle comes on the market. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about that. Yeah, let's see. I have this clicker that requires that I do it manually once here. All right, so okay, so before I get started, there is an webinar coming up that I thought you guys might be interested in. I've got the address here. Obviously, I don't think you can grab it, but if you play the video playback, you can get that, or if you contact me, I'll email it to you. But it's about the safe installation of battery systems, primarily focused on residential. It's happening this week on October, well, 1 week from today, October 25th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. So I just thought that was something to make you aware of, and thought you would like to know that. Or you can do a search on IREC and batteries webinar, and you may find it just through Google. So, okay, so the Clean Energy Associates just came out with a report and basically saying that solar cell production grew 20% worldwide in the first quarter of this year, which is pretty dramatic. And that's sort of a good news, bad news kind of thing, is that they're anticipating solar cells, not panels, but cells, will grow an additional 50% over the next 3 years. So that's the good news. Now, the bad news is that most of this production is still in China. In fact, China still accounts for about 79% of all of the wafers that are manufactured worldwide. Let's see, oh no, 79% of all of the polysilicon and about 97% of all of the wafers, and then 85% of all of the cells. Those are the, after the wafers have been impregnated with the wires and the like, and about 75% of all of the solar panels through their operations. So one of the things that I think is a little unclear when we've talked about the Inflation Reduction Act and how a lot of these things are coming to the US. Well, I can see that the solar panels are going to be assembled here, but is the polysilicon going to be made here? Are the wafers going to be made here? Are the cells going to be made here? Or are things just going to be brought in from China and assembled in the US? So that will be something to look to, because if we're still dependent on China, for example, in this case, for all of the raw materials to make the panels, then the supply chain disruption is still an issue. So we'll see how that works out. The California Energy Commission has just come out with some rules where they're hoping to make time of use energy pricing a bit more transparent to the consumer. And what they're saying is they would like the utilities to move to an at least hourly pricing based on their costs. Currently, most time of use pricing is like peak demand, mid-range, low demand. So that's normally, let me switch over to speaker here. That's normally what we see, and they're saying we want it not just 3 times a day, 3 different categories, but at least hourly. They also want to maintain a public database where consumers can go in and see just what is the pricing of all of the utilities, so that that becomes very transparent out there in the marketplace. And then they want the utilities to educate the public on just what's going on. So again, this is a move towards, as California goes, so goes the nation. So we'll see how that works out. The new EV that's in the market, which I was quite impressed with this, the 2024 Silverado. Now, we've talked a little bit about the Ford Lightning and how all of this thing is going to be a game changer. Well, Chevy is now coming on board. They just announced this week a deal with SunPower for bidirectional charging on these EVs. Now, the Silverado has a 400-mile range and a 200 kilowatt hour battery, which is pretty amazing. I mean, I was amazed by the Ford Lightning having a 92 or a 96 kilowatt hour battery, depending. Well, this is 200 kilowatt hours. So to give some perspective, that would basically mean a suburban home that uses around 30 kilowatt hours a day without any kind of conservation. Well, now you're looking at almost a week of backup supply just by hooking your truck into your home. The retailing, they're saying, starts at about $40,000. Probably just like the Ford Lightning, the availability is going to be so limited that the prices are much higher than that. But that should work its way through. And then again, it builds up. I guess you get all the bells and whistles. You can be paying as much as $107,000, which I guess, I've not been out in the pickup truck world buying anything, but I guess that's kind of comparable to what's out there with the gas engine ones. These vehicles have 10 outlets, which tells me that the inverting is done in the vehicle, just like in the Ford Lightning. So what they're doing is the charging station is not going to do the inversion and charging. That's all going to be happening within the vehicle. So the charging station is a glorified extension cord. And then they're also marketing, not only is this a vehicle to grid, vehicle to home operation where you can use the power from the truck to power your home and then of course export to the grid if you were so inclined, but it also has a vehicle to vehicle. They were touting that you could use this like to recharge another electric vehicle, which I don't know, maybe that's like jump starting somebody if there's an emergency, but I'm not quite sure what applications are out there for that, but it's there. They're marketing that. Another thing that was in the news this week was Enervenue has announced they're offering a 20-year warranty on their nickel hydrogen batteries. And nickel hydrogen is a battery chemistry that's primarily been used in aerospace, largely because it's extremely expensive. But it has a long life. In fact, they're thinking that this will be probably a 30-year life, and they're warranting it for 20 years with very little degrading over that period of time. And many utilities are looking at this as an energy storage device, a stationary storage device at large scale. Some of the advantages of this, this technology is that it does have a very long life. It's not temperature sensitive in any way, really has operational from minus 40 degrees Celsius to positive 60 degrees Celsius. That's quite a range. Very lightweight. It has the same kind of energy density as lithium ion. Maintenance free, nothing to do there, and very tolerant of abuse and harsh situations. So very robust. The downsides, of course, is it is extremely expensive. But like many technologies, as it becomes more widely adopted, perhaps we'll see the prices come down. It also has a high discharge or high self-discharge rate. It's kind of a hybrid between a battery and a fuel cell. So it's pretty much like a nickel cadmium battery, although they're taking the cadmium out and replacing it with hydrogen that's kept under pressure that functions a bit like a fuel cell. So that's a new technology there. So that's pretty much the news from the solar industry this week. Does anybody have any questions or anything else they want to add to that?
Do you have to recharge the hydrogen at all? I mean,
well, they are rechargeable. So I'm assuming, that like most of these things, it's the anode and the cathode, and one gets depleted as it draws down. So the other will definitely have to be reconstituted. However, I don't know, repurified.
I mean, does the hydrogen is notorious for leaking and getting out? Are these sealed sufficiently that they don't have any problem where you'd have to put some more hydrogen in after 6 months or a year or something?
Yeah, apparently not. You can see in this photo here that they
Mhm.
do look like these little pressurized canisters
Oh,
that
yeah,
are
look like they're gonna go on a space shuttle.
yeah, well, they do. They go on
Yeah.
the Hubble spacecraft apparently uses
Okay.
this kind of battery. So I would guess that it doesn't deplete, it depletes probably a little bit, but they're anticipating over the 30-year period, you'll still have operations at about 87% of its original capacity. So that's pretty good. So, but you're right. That's one of
Yeah.
my pet peeves about hydrogen is it's such a small molecule. It does tend to leak out. So we'll see. Another interesting technology.
Hmm.
Yep. Anybody else have any questions, any comments? Let's see. Honda's built. Yeah, Dennis just posted that Honda's building a battery plant. So we're seeing a lot of that happening. So we're seeing the battery plants, we're seeing the solar plants, all these announcements, largely due to the fact that we're shifting over to electric vehicles, and also that the domestic manufacture of product is a bigger and bigger thing within the solar industry. Now, Devanand, you had sent through a video you had asked me to take a look at. It was by Bill Brooks. Are you on? Are you on the call, Devanand?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I did watch through that, and it was quite interesting. The thing I took away from it that I didn't really realize is he was talking about how you've got the 120% rule, which we know where you cannot exceed the bus bar limitation by more than 20%. So if you've got a 200 amp rated service panel and you've got 200 amp service coming in from the utility, you can't have more than 40 additional amps coming in from your array. And I think people are familiar with that. But he was saying there's also an option within that where if all of the breakers, aside from the main service coming in from the utility, do not exceed the amp rating of the bus bar, that is also acceptable. So, so in a case like that, you might say, for example, let's say you have 200 amp service coming in and an 80 amp breaker coming in from your array. Well, as long as all of your load circuits do not exceed 120 amps, it's still acceptable.
Okay.
Even though the input is going to be more than the bus bar rating. But the argument there is because the output could never exceed 120 amps, then you could never be running more than 200 amps over that bus bar. So that's an option. And he was giving an example where you could essentially hook into a sub panel and just simply replace all of the load circuits, move those to the sub panel, and then just have a straight pass-through breaker to avoid the 120% rule. And it felt like a little bit of a fiddling, maybe very specific to California, because what he was trying to get away from is the fact that there have been so many rule changes in California that if you did swap out your main service panel, then the California utility might require you to rebury new service entrance line all the way from the transformer, because they're saying you've upgraded your service and now you have to do that, or you might have to move it away from a gas line, or you might incur many tens of thousands of dollars of cost just because you want to upgrade your main service panel. So you can get away from that by simply taking all the breakers out of the main service panel, moving them to a sub panel, and then just having a single pass-through breaker in the main. It's all part of their regulations. Probably doesn't apply in Trinidad and Tobago. Certainly doesn't apply here in southeastern Ohio, where we're lucky if you've got a service panel. So
But he was doing that presentation also, I believe, on behalf of a company called Franklin whole home energy storage system. I don't know if you had a look at the that particular product from that company.
No, I didn't. I didn't look at that. Yep. Yeah, it was a very interesting presentation. I'd recommend folks look it up. It was Bill Brooks, and it was at the what was the conference he was speaking at? It's like Solar Plus or something like that.
Solar Plus,
Yeah. Okay. Did anybody else have anything to add for the good of the cause here before I jump in to my topic du jour or topic de semaine? All right. Yeah, one thing that popped up in some of our discussions, we just had a class this weekend, and this came up a little bit, was the issue of MC4 connectors. And this is one of those things where I think we all just assume an MC4 connector is an MC4 connector, but that is definitely not the case. For those of you who are not familiar with the terminology of an MC4 connector, it stands for multi-contact, and then the contact pin is 4 millimeters. So it is the standard for connectorizing solar panels, and it has been for a number of years. But the very first MC4 was developed by a company, and is that pronounced Stably? Does anybody know? Is that, it's a German company, obviously. But in 1996, they came out with the first one of these, and they're still considered sort of the gold standard of MC4 connectors. And they do have about a 30% market share out there of MC4 connectors. But if you've ever looked to buy MC4 connectors, you'll find that there are literally hundreds of manufacturers of MC4 connectors out there in the marketplace. And if you're like me, you're going to go, well, what's the low cost provider? An MC4 is an MC4 is an MC4. You can see there's about 149 providers in Asia, a few in Europe, but a few in North America. Amphenol was kind of the second big competitor back in 2008. And they started talking about them as MC4 compatible. And so what's happened is MC4 has become kind of a generic term, sort of like Xerox or Kleenex or any of those things, but it really was a trade name that has been co-opted in many regards. Well, there was a German study that took place, and they found that when you misapply an MC4 or mismatch an MC4, there's a tremendous risk of lowering your performance, but also of fires. In fact, they found that 24% of all of the fires that were associated with solar were because of the connectors. They just heat up. The fittings aren't fitting exactly right, so they're arcing within that connector, not making a good contact, and so that's causing problems, either loss of performance if it's mild, or in extreme cases, fires. So there was a recent study here as part of that, and they looked at what is the primary reason for module failures out there in the field. And of those, an unprotected connector, which is basically one that the wire is not seated well in there and is exposing some of the elements of it. And also dissimilar connector types was far and away the #1 cause of module failure. So one of the things that you need to do when you're specifying, buying all of the product, is make sure that your connectors that you're going to be using to make your jumpers, if you have to do any repairs out in the field, make sure they are exactly the same manufacturer and type of connector as is on the solar panels that you're using. So that's the issue that it all comes down to. And I was talking to a commercial installer, and he was saying they've had a lot of problems with supply chain. So you get everything on hand, but then you don't have the right connectors on hand. So now you're scrambling around trying to get the exact same connector that is on those panels. So, I mean, one option would be to cut the connectors off of the panels, and put new ones on that match. But that's a pretty extreme and labor intensive thing to be doing. And you're probably going to create more problems for yourself than you're solving. So as I said, the potential issues here with the MC4 connectors not being matched is loss of power, arcs, ground faults, fires. And so in the new code that's coming out, there is a section in there, 690.33C, talking about the mating of connectors. And it says where mating connectors are not the identical type and brand, they shall be listed and identified for intermatability as described in the manufacturer's instructions. And there is a standard out there, the UL 6703, connectors for use in photovoltaic systems. So what you're going to have to start doing is making sure that the connectors on the panels and the connectors that you're using for jumpers and the like meet the UL 6703 standard for intermatability, or else just make sure that they're exact same manufacturer, the exact same model. Yeah.
But Jay,
Yeah.
PV panels manufacturers, they don't really include any information about the connectors they use, not in a data sheet. How would you come up to that solution?
If they don't, well, I guess one response might be they're probably going to have to start now that this is a thing. But, I guess you would find it once you get the panel, you can look at the connector. It will be labeled. It'll tell you the manufacturer and the model number on that connector. I don't know if it's going to say in really tiny little raised letters if it's UL 6703 or not, but I would suspect you can research it. I don't know. That never occurred to me that they're gonna hide that from you. So
Enphase, when they use their micro inverters, they have half a connector sticking out to hook up to the line. And when I go and hook up the other half to the system, I can have issues there.
yeah, you've got to make sure that the connector that is attached to the Enphase microinverter is UL 6703 rated, and that the connector that's on the panel is UL 6703 rated. So you've got to now, it's up to you as the installer to make sure these are meeting the mated connector standard. Otherwise, and that's a good example there, Bob, because you don't have a lot of control over the connector that Enphase is sticking on their thing, and you don't have a lot of control over the connector the panel guy is sticking on there. So you're going to have to do a little bit of research ahead of time. And probably what's going to end up happening is you find one that you know is suitable, and then you've just got to, you'll stick with that same panel, that same microinverter. But my guess is with a company like Enphase, they're pretty legit. So they're going to have something that meets that standard. Now it's a matter of which panel. Did you buy the panels off the back of a truck somewhere, or, is it a good, legit panel? So
does it determine what truck I buy it off of?
Yeah, just not one in Cook County in Chicago. But in an extreme case like that, you might have to buy some connectors and swap out the connectors on the panel. I mean, that would be a labor intensive thing, but you might have to recrimp on just to match up or to mate properly with the Enphase inverter, because the Enphase inverter doesn't really have enough space, enough slack wire to swap out those. So I'd be more inclined to just clip off the connector on the panel and stick a new one on. I wouldn't want to do it, but that would be your extreme, last option if they're not going to mate up properly and you don't want to get rid of the panels. So, okay. Anybody else have any questions on that particularly? Because the reason I decided to bring this one up was just because it's one of those things that we deal with without really thinking, and it's just going to be one more thing that we've got to put in our checklists as we're setting these things up.
Your testing is not cheap, so I would expect MC4 connectors, if you're using those, the cost will be a bit higher than the traditional ones.
What was that? I didn't catch the first part.
I say the costing for any connectors coming with a UL certification, their cost will be somewhat higher than all the
Yeah.
other MC4 connectors.
Yeah, and I think if you use the I'm not good with the name, but that German Stabli, you know, is like the gold standard. So if you use that as your go-to, you know, you're probably not going to have a problem. So I suspect Amphenol too. Amphenol is a big company, but where you will run into problems likely is if you do like what I do in class, is just buy the cheapest ones I can get on Amazon, because we're not going to be using them, and they come from, you know, some backwater in China. You know, I don't know that I'd want to use those with my solar panels. So. Okay, anybody else have any comments? Any questions? Anything for the good of the cause? Anything you want me to do some research on? All right, well, we're going to be done quick here this week, so I appreciate your attention, and we'll see you all next week. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jay.